Good afternoon, everyone. It's Miles Proden with the BC Wine Institute here. I hope everyone can hear me all right and see me all right, but more importantly, can see the screen with the slide ahead of it. So I'm out here to give you an update on the hospitality announcement, Wholesale hospitality announcement the government made a few days ago. I understand that there was a very successful webinar session yesterday with Chris Coletta and Mark Hicken. I was able to take in part of that and so get up some feedback from that, which was great. Thanks to both of those and Chris for putting that together. So hopefully can provide a little bit more background and a little bit more of an update as to where we're at with this. This is not as interactive as Zoom, as you can no doubt see. It is just me that's here presenting to you, although we have activated the chat feature, so please make use of that. I'm going to stop in a couple points along this presentation to take questions and comments, so there's that opportunity. So make yourself available for that. But I am going to try to keep as close to as I can for within an hour, respecting everybody's time. So again, welcome and appreciate everyone's time and input here. What I wanted to do was start off with a little bit of an update or a background as to where we're at in terms of leader sales. There's been a lot of discussion, supposition, guessing, and rumors as to how bad and or good the BC wine industry has been doing in this COVID situation. And the numbers speak for themselves. And so I want to kind of run through that. I'm sure all of you are aware of these, but just to put a quantity to it, this is what this is all about. This is a slide I'm going to skip over because I've actually broken it down into some verbal or a slide that identifies it. But really, it's a historical picture of where we're at. And the two arrows that I've indicated is that at the top, we, for the first time, have lost VQA market share in the province. So we were down 1.42%. And if you go down at the bottom arrow, the last time that we had a loss anywhere like that was in March of 2012. So I can't remember what happened in March of 2012, but it's been a significant time since we've seen that kind of a market share loss. The other thing that's interesting, and it leads a little bit into the conversation, is a change in format. Where we're seeing, and again, I'll show this slide in a minute, but the overall market share for wine in the province has increased. So there is no, as up to April, so there is no doubt that people were buying wine. The problem was they weren't buying as much VQA wine as they had in the past. And where we're actually physically seeing that is happening is in the large format. So what this slide here shows that there's a decrease in the actual liter, the bottle liters, and it's actually being taken up by the large formats bag in the box. So that's an opportunity and or a disadvantage to us, depends on how you look at it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into the slide here. So just to encapsulate what I've been talking about, again, while the overall provincial leader, again, we only get the liter sales. We don't get dollar sales anymore. 2015, when we switched over to this whole wholesale at the LDV side of things, we no longer were able to get dollars, so we only can see liters. So over the previous 12 months, the overall market share of wine has grown by 4.5%. That's a significant amount of liters if you think about it. I don't know the amount of number of cases, but is significant. But if you compare what VQA's done, we actually lost 1.4 market points percent market share in that. So again, we've never seen that since 2012 when we lost 1.5. So I guess the best way of looking at that, or trying to summarize, is that the overall provincial wine sale pie grew by 4.5%, but our piece of that pie, which up until April had been growing as big, if not bigger than the pie itself, shrunk. So if anyone's there to say that a lot more wine has been selling in the province, that's true. It's substantiated by the numbers, but it is not anything that the VQA category is seeing. So it's important that we in government and anyone else out there realize that we are not enjoying a huge increase in sales because of COVID. We take a little bit of a closer look on that, specifically on-premise. And again, on-premise is wine that is sold on-premise. So really that's restaurants and liquor stores. And in this instance, it is the private liquor stores, pubs, and as I say, restaurants. That really is what's called on-premise. And we know without a doubt, and it's because they were physically closed because of COVID and unable to sell directly, that we saw a 96% decline in that channel. So no big surprise there to everybody. We know they're slowly reopening. We're seeing that have happened, but there's a lot of restrictions around capacity, and so we don't anticipate us to get back to anywhere close to the numbers that we had in the previous year. And we're at 50%. It would be at best if everyone came and only could take 50% of them in. So that's unrealistic. So we don't see that coming back likely for months or if not years. And more significantly, I guess, is the loss of that channel. Those are premium channels for us, for a lot of us that sell to on-premise. Again, not everybody does. We recognize that not all wineries take advantage of that channel, but it's significant to a lot of us. So I guess I should also say, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is there is no doubt with a 96% decline in wine sales and with on-premise as of April, and we know it didn't get any better in May and not in June either. It speaks to just how badly our on-premise partners are hurting. So there is no doubt that they need support, and I think the intent of the hospitality pricing was to provide that to them. But we're concerned as to how that obviously is affecting our industry. Talk about winery direct sales. Again, there's this idea that what we've made up for in the wine industry with a decline in on-premise sales or winery walk-up sales or people coming to the tasting room was made up in direct delivery. So there was a lot of talk at the time of, and still to this day, and the BCWI has been pretty adamant in supporting people calling and buying wine and having it shipped direct to consumer. So that has increased 135% in April as of February. But when we dive into it a little more closely, we see that in December, for instance, March, that was only 20%. And so what that's telling us is that in February and March, pre-COVID, as we started getting into it, there was a big increase as everyone was doing what's known as pantry loading. So unfortunately, not to the same degree they were pantry loading with toilet paper. They were definitely pantry loading with BC wine, but that quickly slowed down. We don't have any numbers really after in looking at that after April. So, but anecdotally, we know that that's what's happened. Big uptick and uptake in pantry loading for wine, but that's fallen off, and I'm no doubt the wineries in the audience today can appreciate that. The BCWI did a survey in April as well, and what we found is while there was reported 80% 87% increase in online direct-to-consumer sales, that was offset by an 82% decrease in walk-up and curbside sales. I think another thing people will need to realize, and you as wineries will know, that a lot of those direct-to-consumer sales needed to be supported through covering of shipping costs, all kinds of incentives to encourage people to do that. So that definitely is not as good a margin as it could be as someone coming to the winery, clearly, when we're having to ship the wine and cover the cost of that. And again, just like on premise, when we see reopening, we don't see winery direct people coming to the wineries, I should say walk-in opportunities necessarily spiking right away. We know that phase 3, which is imminently to come, will open up a lot more travel. And so prior to that, currently, a lot of wineries have been putting into place programs and protocols. And again, the BCWI did a great effort in touching base with stakeholders to get an idea of what they thought, wineries thought would be the best guidelines. And what we developed was that best practices for opening. And so if you have not taken advantage of that or seen that, again, it's not the guidebook per se. There's a lot more you can do and a lot less you could do. But really, those are best practices that we as an industry felt was important. So they're there and can be found on the WineBC or winebc.com COVID site. Sorry, I digress a little bit there, but I'm really talking about people coming to the winery. We don't see that taking off anytime soon. And again, I'm pretty sure you guys in the wineries know that that's the case, and that's not at all what we're seeing. So we don't see people rushing in. It's going to be slow, it's going to be measured, and it's going to be careful, and that's the way to do it for sure. I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any specific questions to talk about sort of the update, what's going on. So in terms of the background and some of the numbers, again, those numbers are only to April. We do lag behind on the LDB numbers that we get, but I think it's indicative of what we're definitely seeing in the wineries themselves. And I guess the message is to anybody and everybody, perhaps I'm preaching to the converted, is that we were not and do not see a huge uptake in wine direct to consumer that's going to help to take care of what we've lost and look like we're going to continue to lose on-premise and winery direct. So, has anyone got a question? There's time for questions at the end. Again, if I don't get a time to answer the question, write the question in the comment box, and we can talk about it and follow up with you. So. It's meant to be an interactive presentation. I want to give you a bit of a BC, sort of the BTAP update. And again, the BTAP acronym is thrown around quite a bit, and I recognize that not everyone may be aware of what BTAP is, but it is the Business Technical Advisory Panel for Liquor, and it was put into place June 2018, actually. I think it was in June 2017, by the way. Sorry, it was June. We're in late 2017. It was in June 2018 that the first recommendations came out. And what it was this current government's idea is to get everybody involved in the liquor industry into the same room. As you know, and I often preach and ask, is that and tell the story of. Government doesn't want to hear from, well, government will hear from anybody. That's their job. They are working for the people. But to be most effective, it's best to come forward with one clear voice and one clear ask. Anytime that there's anything that's conflicting or opposite, government is not in the business of picking winners and losers. And so that's what they try to stay away from. So they thought and felt, and we as the wine industry thought it and continue to think is a good idea to sit down with our other peers in the liquor business, whether it's the distillery people, craft distillery people, the craft beer people, the national beer brands, the national alcohol brands, the restaurants, the private liquor stores, everyone to sit down together, and so that we weren't going one-offs to government asking for things, to come up with recommendations to provide guidance to the government. And so those recommendations were made in June of 2018. and there were 24 of them. I don't know if you follow on my CEO update, but there's links there. I imagine Mark, who did head up that. Mark Hicken, who headed up that process and spoke yesterday. The links to that document are readily available, so happy to send that out to everybody. And there's 24 specific recommendations in there. That's everything from hospitality wholesale, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here in a moment, all the way through to updating better access to the LDV or BC liquor stores, something I know that our industry's been asking for, and everything in between. So a lot of it doesn't pertain to the BC wine industry because of our ability to direct deliver. Again, something I'll get into a little bit more here in a moment. But still, as active participants in the BC liquor business in this province, we had a seat and continue to have a seat at that table. So 24 of those recommendations were made. Then COVID hits, and suddenly we're all looking at what we can do and what we need to do to help to alleviate all these issues that we've got going on. The BTAP panel has always been there, but it was activated to come up with some key COVID emergency recommendations that government could consider to help to alleviate and help the liquor industry to recover from COVID. And so those were the emergency recommendations. The BCWI, clearly we participated in those and we supported those, and they included hospitality pricing to on-premise licensees. So we did at the time, and again continue today to support that. I think the issue for us, again, when we talk about this a little further here, is we weren't expecting the extent to which that hospitality relief was going to be provided, and over the length of time that it was, and how it was enacted, and so that becomes problematic for us. But I can tell you, and we were involved from the onset, and we supported the initial 24, and we supported these and continue to support these recommendations. The other one that is important to us that had happened, as you probably all are aware, was to extend tasting rooms and sales licensing areas to site-wide. That we got government support from. That would not have happened without the BTAP support, group support on that. So that was key important to us, not just in the wine business, but also in the other manufacturing liquor business like our brew pubs and the distillery people. So fast-track structural changes, that was important for a lot of the patio applications that were coming on with the restaurants and on-premise, but it also applied to restaurants that wanted to take advantage and or needed to expand their footprint at the winery in order to keep the social distancing and all the protocols and best practices. So there are practical needs that are practical regulations that need to be updated, and so those two specifically address what we were talking about. As important too was manufacturers to deliver directly to consumers from off-site storage locations. So what that simply means is that, and I know not all wineries necessarily have this, but many wineries will have off-site storage facilities in the Lower Mainland, for instance, for better access to the market there. And so as it happens today, if a wine is sold directly at the winery, you get a call from a customer in Vancouver and you need to sell, and they bought that wine and you need to ship that wine to them. Now you arrange to have that shipped from your winery here in the Okanagan or wherever in BC your winery is, and it gets to that customer in Vancouver. That comes at expense, it comes at timing, and it doesn't seem to be too practical for a number of reasons, not least of which is the financial impact to the winery who's underwriting or throwing in the cost of that. But there's also all the other considerations like carbon footprint and the rest of it, because that wine is also probably sitting in your warehouse in Vancouver. And so why could we not have the wine delivered, bought through the winery, through that whole process, online process, but delivered from the offsite warehouse in Vancouver? So technically that's not allowed, and I'm sure nobody's doing it. But that needs to change, and that is a COVID. Again, all of these that I'm talking about that BTAP put forward were considered COVID emergencies and are considered COVID emergencies. A lot of the other BTAP recommendations have been put to the side because we need to deal with COVID first and take care of that. Licensee sales, that was another thing BTAP approved. That is having a private liquor store sell directly to on-premise. The BCWI is not in full support of that. We're a little bit concerned. BTAP is aware of that. But again, the BTAP process is all about negotiating what's best for the industry at large. And so we've got great relationships with our BTAP partners. And so these things get talked about at length. Expand BDL distribution. That doesn't necessarily come into play with us at all. That's the beer people that got their own distribution system. They're looking to expand for other products like refreshment beverages. And so again, as a participant in BTAP, they've got what they need to have happen, want to have happen, and that's put at the table as well. Introduce alternative distribution system for non-stock products. Again, that doesn't relate to our industry at all. Those are wines that are brought into the province that don't go through the BC LDB warehouse, that are brought in, and a lot of that really tends to be high-end Scotch and wine too, but a lot of high-end Scotches and wines and other alcohol that the BC LDB is not going to take on necessarily, because the BCLS liquor store is going to take on because it's too expensive. And then, as importantly as all of these, again, is the launch and review of support for local products. We again at the BTAP table sit next to the craft brewery people and sit next to the craft distillery people, and we all have in common that we are made from local product, and that we need to have that needs to be recognized from government, and that we need to they need to recognize that, and we don't necessarily need to be, we can't be lumped together with all alcohol. BC manufacturers are specific and unique. So let me talk a little bit about hospitality wholesale update specifically. And again, you got a briefing. I think those who were on the call yesterday with Chris and Mark got an idea what was going on. Again, this was originally a request in the BTAP initial recommendations and in the list of COVID emergency measures that I just spoke to. So government came out and announced that there would be a temporary wholesale pricing, allowing hospitality to pay only the wholesale price. Earlier, there have been discussions about would it be no wholesale price? Would it be a fixed wholesale price? Would it be, wholesale plus 10%, plus 5%? And again, at the time, we were supportive of that. The challenge is that nobody really knows what that markup necessarily is for other alcohol. That price is set by the liquor distribution branch and was added on to it. It could be anywhere from, approximately, we approximate it to be about 20%. So government came back and announced the other day that it wasn't going to be a wholesale cost plus. It was going to be just a straight wholesale price, and that was going to go into effect as of July 20th and would last until March 31st. Again, a lot of these measures in the COVID emergency were meant to be temporary, and so clearly this is temporary. Although again, it seems to be a lengthy period in order to adjust. So, what does that mean to us as wineries? Well, the LDBs come out and confirmed that as of July 20th, that the hospitality price the hospitality customers can now buy at the wholesale price. As important to us is that the manufacturers, suppliers, and agents not only need to, but they can only sell at that a zero hospitality price. So that we weren't necessarily anticipating. We thought that it made sense to decrease the markup on wholesale to provide some relief to the on-premise people. But we weren't expecting our direct delivery SKUs to be included in that. And so we were taken back a bit by that, and are following up with government just for clarification on what we need to do to rectify that. And again, in September 1st, hospitality customers will have access to the complete list. So, I mean, hospitality customers can always find out what the hospitality price is, but they've never had really direct access to it. And as of September 1st, that will be published. Perhaps what's even more problematic or challenging for us is that a way to compensate for that would be for us to adjust our wholesale prices. And so that's an option open to us. The challenge is that we only have until the end of day today to do that for period 5 in August. So again, we were a bit taken back on the short amount of time that we were allowed to do that. And so it's kind of caught us, and a lot of us scrambling. I've been asked, what should we do about it? And the only advice I've got is because this is the way it is today, I would consider most definitely going in and adjusting your prices. The challenge there is, of course, is that when you do your hospitality pricing, you're going to, hospitality on-premise people are going to see that what you've done is done. You've adjusted your price for that. So that's not best for the relationship. That was not what was intended to do. What was intended to do was provide some relief to on-premise and hospitality. So these are some pretty significant concerns that the wine industry and the BCWI's got specifically. I'm going to stop there for a second and see if there's any questions. I've got one. Temporary is not what the hospitality industry is lobbying for. No, clearly not. We know that they've been asking for hospitality wholesale forever, and it came up clearly in the recommendations from BTAP, and that's why the initial BTAP recommendation was not wholesale, zero wholesale. It was wholesale plus a fixed amount, and that amount to be determined. What's happened is that because of COVID, what the hospitality has asked for is at least this temporary measure. This temporary measure again is not zero plus a fixed amount. It is zero, and that temporary is all the way to March 31st of this year. So that's a significant discount, and it's a significant amount of time. I see another note here saying recommendation to government that sales are moving lower price. Yes, there's a question about what this means for imports. I'll talk about that in a minute. Yes, and again, another note saying, no, I don't think there's any mystery or misunderstanding about temporary measure for hospitality. Hospitality has long advocated for a wholesale, a zero wholesale, and again, we support our hospitality partners. We specifically support them now in the COVID crisis, but zero in a temporary process while we see what the effects are. We could see, but long term, that remains to be seen. We need to see what the effect is and what's going on. I skipped to the question. Let me go to what we're doing about the response to this. So, I think again, and I'm pretty specific and adamant about this, is that we understand as an industry and support government's intention to giving relief to hospitality. There is no doubt within our sector they are the hardest hit. I think I spoke earlier about just what the effect has been for our industry, but it is catastrophic to say it would be not overestimating to what's happened with the on-premise. You can talk to them in the restaurants, and they talk about it. Anywhere from 30 to 50 to even higher percent of those businesses won't make it, won't come back, and or won't make it. So I guess the question we need to ask ourselves is, that's an important channel to us. So what do we need to do to support them? And I don't think anyone would deny that they need that support. But at the same time, it's not as though our industry is doing tremendously well. So I just want to make sure that's that context here. We have got nothing against our on-premise partners. They're a key category. About half of our BCBQA wine are sold through that channel, and so it's very supportive of our industry and always has been. I think the problem, though, is that in making the recommendation and allowing this to have happen, what was been lost sight on is that we are land-based. We've got unique regulatory and policy and market conditions that are unique to anybody else in this industry. You cannot have a land-based winery agreement without having land. Our craft brewing partners don't have that requirement. Our craft distillery partners don't have that requirement. It's not as though that we can get up and move somewhere else. Probably as importantly, it's not as though that we can just turn off the taps and sit back and see what's going to happen. We've got wine in bottles from 2018 that needs to find a home. We've got wine in tank from 2019 that needs to get into bottles to find a home. And we've got a 2020 vintage in the vineyard that's coming on strong. So we don't have the luxury of being able just to shut things down, send everyone home, and get through what inventory we've got. So that makes us a unique player in the alcohol industry here in the province. And I think we need to re-emphasize that with government any chance we get, and that's exactly what we're doing. Eliminating that hospitality markup completely, again, I don't think it didn't recognize who we are as farmers and growers in this province, and we are as much, if not more, wine producers as we are growers, and so we are unique in that instance. It's critically important. That's the message we always should be on. All of us, regardless of who we are, large, medium, and small. That designation is irrelevant when it comes to growing and making wine in this province. So we need that point to be made adamantly, as we often do. But I need your help in doing that. Really, what's happened with that going down to wholesale, pure wholesale, is our competitors, which are import wines, have just lowered their price by 20%. So suddenly we're sitting there looking at our competitors, and they've just dropped their price 20%. So what does that mean to us? How do we react to that? Well, naturally, we're going to have to do what we need to do there and drop those prices because we're going to be at the same zero wholesale. So that doesn't make sense to us at all. I think the other point that needs to be made for those import wines is that in order to get to be an import wine made available at a wholesale price for on-premise purchase, you need to be part of the BC LDB, BC liquor store system. So those import wines have got listings at the BCLS, something that we at the Wine Institute have been asking and working with the BC liquor store for ever since I've been around. And while we've had some relatively good success in the last number of months getting some smaller allocations and smaller SKUs in there, it's going to be really tough for us to compete against those import wines that are coming in at lower prices because they're trying to find a home, trying to come in at lower prices, and also have the benefit of having a shelving space at a BC liquor store. So we need to, again, emphasize and make obvious our need for access to the BC liquor store. Now, make no mistake, the BC liquor store is not for everyone. It's not a get rich quick scheme, as if there's anything like that in this industry. So it's not for everybody, but there are people, wineries out there that have got the wine, they've got the price point, they've got the variety that could support permanent listings at the BCLS. So again, we've had some success recently in getting some short-term quick buys in to get some exposure for, I think we've got up to 19 different wines, and we're looking at doing different things there as well, but we need a more inclusive program to get some permanent listings. And then not least of which out of all this is that there's going to be an increase in consumer pricing. I mean, in order to make up some of that shortfall with the decrease in BC wholesale pricing, we're going to have to make it up somewhere. And the last thing we want to do is take it out of the consumer. So we got to be careful how we do that. And but when we look at options, the on-premise is not a viable option, as much a viable option for us anymore. Again, I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions. The temporary government said that the reduced price that restaurants pay will not necessarily reduce the price of the wine. No, I don't expect it will. I don't think. Do I dare say? I don't think it will at all. So they have their margin to protect, and that's going to go directly to their bottom line. How much money will this cost the BC wine industry? The best calculation that we can do based on what we saw last year. Again, we don't know the dollar sales there. We can just do the calculation based on total volume. It's about for the year in its entirety is about $22.5 million. If we take a look at it, for the term of this temporary interim measure until the March 31st, we're looking at about $15 million. So the question is, how do we make up in that, and where do we get that from? Yes, I see Ian Tossenson's on the line. Ian, how are you? Saying that, agreeing that that decrease in wholesale won't necessarily go to lowering wine list prices. But again, the whole premise behind this was to provide some relief to our hospitality partners. Next steps. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're meeting with government to follow up. We've met with our BTAP partners. Again, we keep in touch with them on all of this. But what we're advocating for is that on-premise direct delivery SKUs should be exempt from wholesale pricing. There's a reason why BC wineries have direct delivery. That's because we live in the province. We make our wine in the province. We invest our money in the province by buying winery land and employing winery employees, and we're a local product, and that local product needs and should be sold directly to our customers. So we maintain that we should be eliminated from those SKUs should be eliminated from having to be at a wholesale price. It's up to the wineries, and every winery to this date has had that relationship with their on-premise partner and being able to negotiate whatever price it is. So that's part of doing business. We don't have anything to do with the BC LDB. They don't touch our product. Import wines do. That's the way importation works around the world. Your wine needs to come in, land somewhere, and be distributed elsewhere. So we don't have anything to do with that. And so direct delivery is what is the lifeblood of our industry. And so we maintain that should be we say that should be maintained. Permit manufacturers to direct deliver from off-store locations. Again, that was clearly a BTAP recommendation as an emergency COVID response, and that's what we always still to this day, to this moment, talk about. I talked about what that really means to us. That's not going to save us all, but it just makes for a more effective and more efficient way of us dealing with our customers who are now switched over to direct delivery. And the other one we need to talk about, and this is something that's been on the table for a long time, and that's being able to update the the manufacturing agreement. As you know, there's this differentiation between a commercial and land-based winery, and I think there's this misunderstanding that a commercial winery somehow is large. It's true that some of the larger wineries do have a commercial, and it's not a license, by the way. Everyone has a wine license, as you know. It's the LDB distribution agreement. We need to rationalize that. What we've got is that about 50% of all the wine that's now grown and produced in this province is now under a commercial agreement because of the way the structure of that is. We've always said, the Appalachian Task Group said this from the very beginning, is that what we need to do is have everyone playing by the same rules, and provided that it's 100% certified 100% BC, it should be treated that way. And so that's going to be important to us as we move forward. That means access to alternative packaging. I know that's something that comes up through the VQA and the BCWA panel, and that's being taken a look at with a potential plebiscite. But we need that to happen now. As we have oversupply of grape and juice looking for a home, we need relief valves to get that, to make sure that can get out there. So we're also asking that government consider us to, in the same instance, temporarily provide a relief as they have for wholesale pricing, provide relief for 100% certified 100% BC wine to get into the marketplace and take advantage of that alternative packaging that industry is looking for, or sorry, consumers are looking for. I'm going to stop again. I got another quick update here, question. Why the date, the 20th, and can't adjust prices? Yes, yeah, the 20th is a problematic date as well. We're not sure where that came from. It's mid-period. So what happens as of July 20th is that on-premise can now buy their wine at that wholesale price. So they won't necessarily know what that wholesale price is, because that's not being published until September. But if they are able to know, they can buy it at that. So that's where the July 20th comes in for. The deadline for today for getting our changes for August, for the August period, again, seems to be pretty tight for us. So if we can get our SKUs, direct delivery SKUs exempt, that will help to alleviate that. But again, my advice to everybody is that you take advantage of that or make that happen, those changes happen, because it may take some time for us to get through what we need to get through. Quick Ontario update, just while I've got everyone's attention, because this is timely. In June 2019, Ontario made it for a variety of reasons, but basically because the federal government finally totally pulled back out of any oversight on interprovincial trade of alcohol and left it up to the provinces. So what that created was a potential loophole in Ontario. So to plug that loophole, they quickly put some legislation in place where they made it illegal for consumers to buy direct from wine from other provinces, and they put a scheduled repeal date of January 1st in there. Again, until then, they were relying on the federal legislation. Saying when the federal legislation was repealed or removed, they needed to plug that hole. So we all thought things were looking good. However, late last year, just before January 1st, they moved that date out to July 1st. And so July 1st is on the horizon, and looking like everything, all things being equal, will be a go. I've been advised by Ontario and others that even if that July 1st deadline is not extended, that does not automatically mean that it has been repealed. Or even if it has been repealed by July 1st, what's required is legislation policy to make it legal. So just by making it not legal doesn't make it legal, if that makes sense. I'm not a lawyer, but as you can imagine, it can be somewhat complicated. So July 1st is out there, and it would be great if Ontario lived up to that commitment. Something this industry's been asking for direct delivery for some time, direct delivery for across the province for some time. So that would be really helpful for us to have that done. But again, if July 1st comes and passes, it's not necessarily going to be a fait accompli. So I'm going to take a look here at some other questions. BC Wine is in competition with international wines, whether we want it or not. True, we recognize that. Absolutely, that markup on that wine is gone now, so that wine can now be bought at wholesale. BC Wines exemption from mandatory wholesale pricing, as advocated by the BCI, would give us more flexibility. It doesn't negate the competitive pressures. Absolutely, we recognize that. Getting those direct delivery SKUs exempt is not a long-term solution. So we need some of those other aspects those other things that we're asking for to make sure that we can help to offset that. But you're right, it's a stopgap at best, but that will help us to at least see where we net out on this stuff and see how everyone's adapting to it. Fruit and mead wineries and bees certainly appreciate your leadership and equitable treatment. Yes, well, thank you. An important, while not members of the BCWI, an important constituents for sure. Should I just read this out loud? I hope that BC Restaurant Partners continue to support local and list BC wines more than ever. The temptation will be there to list cheap import wines and increase their margin. Maybe the BCRFA could launch a Support BC beverage campaign. Good point. And we've worked closely with the BCRFA. They're instrumental in the Eat Buy Local program, and we sit with them in working with government to providing some funding around that. So, yep, there you go. That's what Ian's reported as well. So I guess in summary is that hospitality pricing for on-premise does not come at a surprise to the BCWI. We sat at the BTAP table and agreed to it at that time and the initial recommendations, recognizing that that industry needed support and help, and in order to be competitive and in order to continue to support BC Wine. But that was made along with the other 23 recommendations. So it was a package deal, if you will. And we all continued around the BTAP table to work hard to implement that. Subsequent to that, we have this horrific scenario of COVID, and no one could have anticipated or imagined that for sure. And we're just starting to come out of that. And the worst hit, undeniably, out of all that are on-premise partners. And so we supported moving up the hospitality pricing mechanism to help to offset that. We supported that. But again, I think the challenge for us was that when it's come out, and while it supports what our partners in hospitality need, it also unintended consequence is that it supports import wines to a much higher degree than we ever had anticipated, and we had not anticipated for direct delivery SKUs to be not included. So those are some specific things that we need to address, as are the other items about delivery from a third-party warehouse and the 100% certified 100% BC, making sure we're all playing on the same playing field and having access to the same markets. Again, these are all critical, not just to the longevity of our industry, but to having the BC wine industry allowed to recover from COVID as well. I think that's it. If you have any other questions, it's an ongoing issue. I can tell you that the BCWI has a meeting with government later today. We meet regularly and ongoing with our BTAP partners. Our BTAP partners are supportive of us in our scenario. And so we've got open dialogue there. There are peers. Again, we're in this together, to use the oft-used term, but we're in this together, and we just don't think the BC wine industry needs to be set aside or make any extraordinary efforts or be singled out. So we believe we've got some thoughts on how we can rectify this, and we're actively working on it. So if you have any other questions, please put them into the update or into the chat, and we'll endeavor to get back to you as soon as we can. So thanks everybody, and stay safe, and hope to see you at your winery soon.